Welcome back into the show, everyone. My name is Arthur G. This is the Last Call podcast. And today we are taking a different approach to the spirits that we're trying. Normally, you guys know that I'm a rum, bourbon, mezcal, all spirits, but I've never really dove into the world of Scotch. Today, I'm honored to bring in Dan Crowell. Dan is a national brand ambassador for Glenmorangie here in the United States, but his journeys into spirits is anything but traditional. He started out in Omaha, Nebraska, studying music and keeping time as a drummer before finding his rhythm in the hospitality industry. Today, he holds some of the most rigorous credentials in the business, including the highly coveted Master of Scotch and a diploma from the Edinburgh Whisky Academy. This episode should be a lot of fun, and we get to geek out over Glenmorangie's famously tall Giraffe high stills, their pioneering approach to wood management, and what happens when you introduce heavily roasted chocolate malt into traditional Scotch. Plus, we get to try out a fantastic lineup. I'm really excited to have him on. Dan, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Arthur. Thank you for the opportunity to chat with you about this thing that I care so much about. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. I'm happy to have you on and happy to hear more about it. Honestly, full transparency, if anyone who's listened to the show, like Scotch is one of the few spirits that, short of like Ardbeg and some of the some very different brands, I'm not as well versed in this. So it's always great to get to speak to someone who is so well versed and understands it all. But first things first, tell us about yourself, what you do for Glenmorangie, and take it away.
Right on. So I am the U.S. ambassador for Glenmorangie. And before we go down that path, let me just reiterate that although my career has been dedicated to single malt Scotch whiskey, I'm a growing geeky fan of weird rums and mezcals. So I love where you're headed with that. And, it's all that stuff is an expression of place and people and culture and time and history. And each one is representative of a raw ingredient that works well in a certain place. But it's really just people talking to people in liquid form, just like music is people talking to people in sonic form. The ways that these things are communicated there's no need to share a common spoken language in order for the mediums that we're talking about to have an effective communication loop between the producer and consumer. Kudos to you for studying those other categories. I find them utterly fascinating. My sort of start with all of this, as you'd mentioned, I went to music school with the intent of being a professional musician, or people go to music school to either teach or play or both. And my intent was to be to be a professional musician. And a lot of stuff happens along the way to the things that you plan to do that end up being the things that sort of life means for you to do. And it took a while for me for that to manifest. But I learned a tremendous amount pursuing music as a thing that has served me really well in terms of trying to help people understand this other passion-driven medium that isn't based on sonics, but it is based on artistry, and it's based on communication and the captivating of emotions. So once that became, it was sort of the crashing and burning of every single one of my plans in terms of music and the business of music, that made me realize that all the things that I had been through in the hospitality industry as a function of supporting my sort of obsession with music had taught me a really well-rounded set of disciplines in terms of manifesting passion and allowing that passion to be a sort of a spiritual guiding force, regardless of whether or not the thing that you set out to do specifically manifests itself in exactly the way that you painted it up with your paint by numbers kit. Passion is the thing that drives the boat, and as long as you are open to the flow of energy that passion delivers to you, and you're at least somewhat willing to let it lead you around by the nose a little, then some really incredible stuff can happen, and that's how that's played itself out for me, which is great.
Yeah, it's definitely an interest. I couldn't agree with you more. Even on multiple times where you said that the universal languages are food, spirits, and music. Where I feel that's often very much a placeholder in a like substantial moments in people's lives. So you could remember the song, it takes you to a specific memory or a specific space. The same could be said for a good pour, a good spirit, a good cocktail, because it reminds you of great nights with your friends or family or someone who care about, or just going through some not so great stuff, but it does remind you, it made you stronger or made you the person you are. So definitely, I love that there's kind of a partnership there when that journey from music into something like this.
I not to cut you off, but I think that part of that I find myself talking about more and more and more, and this goes back to that idea of sort of pouring your guts into understanding a thing. The more that the technical aspects become clear, the more the philosophical aspects become part of the vernacular of how you communicate it. Like the more I study, the more I end up talking about the sort of the metaphysical opportunity, that crystalline moment in time, the moment of consumption, the moment of that first note that you hear in that track that takes you to a place. No time has passed. It's like quantum mechanics for the soul to a degree. Time doesn't exist in that moment. It just manifests. It is. And you're there, and it's, listening to, let's say it's, it could be anybody. It could be Miles Davis. It could be David Bowie, Prince, whoever. These people have passed away, but they're there in that moment, and the communication is just as fresh as the day that it was laid down. So you get to partake in this moment of immortality, which I think is really restorative and sort of spiritually cleansing, even if, to your point, even if it reminds you of something, it's a song or something that reminds you of heartbreak or some emotionally devastating thing. You survived that, and here you are, on the other side of it, being a surviving, thriving entity who's moving forward, and the resiliency of that moment. The resiliency shown in that moment can really, I think, help to define a person's the shape of their backbone to a degree on the negative side, and on the positive side, the amorphous blob of their spiritual energy just kind of making stuff happen, which I love.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that I would even joke that there are times that those songs when I need motivation to do something differently, or those drinks, or like, hey, kind of just trying to refocus and re-energize myself, or try to put myself in that mind space, is part of the reason why I enjoy spirits so much, and music, obviously, because those are, to your point, transformative, even if it's just for that instance, or even it's a reminder of how far you've come. And when you think about those, like the spirits and the 15 years and the ages and all this and the generations associated with it, you hit it on it perfectly, was that's a story as well, right? You're drinking generations and generations of creators working together and making something that's beautiful and is now in your glass.
Right.
So did you find that when you went from music and then your approach to hospitality and whiskey and everything, did that kind of all become some perfectly synergistic creature of the now makes who you are? Or was that did those skill sets lend to each other?
You don't know it at the time, the things that you're building towards and the skill sets that you're developing that will serve a greater purpose. Greater is not, and greater is, in the eye of the beholder, but a more holistic and comprehensive and evolved purpose the more the time goes by. Yeah, and I think one of the things you have to do when you're in the hospitality industry is you have to discover your empathy gene, and you have to marry it to your passion gene. Because if you're connected to a thing that you're proud of and that you're passionate about, then the next logical step, and actually the sort of 1A, is sharing that with people in a way that is meaningful to you, but meaningful to them. Seeing things in terms of, I know this is about to blow your mind, and now I'm going to put myself in your shoes and try to help you walk towards this thing that I already know is going to blow your mind in a way that you can wrap your brain around in the context of being you. The whiskey does that really well because, anything that you sort of ingest does this thing where you have to describe it to yourself using your own narrative voice. You don't have anybody else's narrative voice. They can only be told to you in the vernacular of your narrative voice based on what you've experienced to date. So the empathy bit is, I can't do this for you, but I can set the precursors. I can set the sort of the stage whereby you get to lean into this as you, not in the way that I tell you you should, or that I've built a bunch of parameters around your engagement with this thing. It's yours before I showed up. It was yours. It's just difficult to know what you to be able to answer or ask the right questions when you don't know what you don't know. So empathy, you've spent a whole bunch of time shoving a bunch of stuff into your head. The empathy bit is, this person hasn't, but I know that it's going to be something substantive and something sort of monumental for them when they get involved with it. I just got to keep the doors open and build the sidewalk in that direction based on where they are and where I hope that they move towards. And that is all. I think that's ultimately the marriage of passion and empathy.
I love that. Was there a specific aha moment where you realized that transition was going to turn into where you are now, where you wanted to get into representing a spirit or to here? Or was there that moment while you were working in hospitality, you're like, this is something I want to do forever or for the foreseeable future?
I don't know if it was, I think it was latent. I think that sort of got planted while I was in hospitality. And then it's not that I left hospitality. I spent a chunk of my time hurling myself off the cliff of deciding that, damn it, I'm going to make this thing happen that I set out to do, which was a self-determining artist person. So, there was the opportunity to take control of a recording studio and record label that was just, here in Nebraska, and it was small to regional, and there were some good acts associated with it, and it was, unfortunately, although I thought it was fortunately at the time, it was attached to a giant bowling center and a live music venue, and so this thing was really, really unwieldy and an absolute capital drain. But it ticked the boxes I needed ticked in order to exhaust every opportunity to pursue the thing that was in my head. And so when the opportunity showed up and then evaporated along with a good chunk of my net worth, then it became survival. Then it was, what do I do? What do I know? What does my skill set suggest? And so when I found myself in repair mode, the survival instinct was, I'm in the wholesale environment. I worked as a distributor for a very long time, a liquor distributor for a very long time. And at the beginning, I just needed to not get fired. So I decided to sort of keep my ear to the ground and find out the thing that made the most people the most nervous in terms of having to explain or educate. And it turned out that it was Scotch whiskey, particularly single malt Scotch whiskey. So my boss at the time gave me a bunch of how long ago it was, a bunch of VHS tapes that were produced by, I think it was Pernod Ricard, to be honest. And I went home and I studied them, and what started as survival became, that was the aha, where almost by the end of the first tape it was like, oh, this isn't just surviving, this is thriving, this is going to be thriving. And this medium, this thing, it's not that whole you'll never work a day in your life. It's work. Yeah. But the thing that I knew by the end of tape one was that I didn't have to I had screwed things up in terms of pursuing a thing, lost my ass. It was time to fix it. And the fixing of it didn't have to suck my soul away. I didn't have to walk the plank for the remainder of my waking hours of life. I could do this. I could sink deeply into a passion for this miraculous liquid, and yet still earn a discernible living doing it, as long as I had the passion and the empathy and the skill set to be able to educate in a way that was welcoming and not pontificating and not building barriers and closing doors where I had no right to build barriers and close doors. So it was in that sort of, it wasn't exactly rock bottom. I mean, if you talked to my banker, it was rock bottom, but it was in the moment that I knew survival was possible. I also saw that the future could be really bright, and single malt was what facilitated that.
That is a fantastic way, the ending is fantastic. So like the path there was obviously, I think that there's a lot to be said about, we said it earlier, those tragic or those heartbreaking, those tough moments where you have to figure something out. And the fact that you didn't end up in a path where you're like, I'm begrudgingly doing something and this is something you can share, be passionate about and great about.
Yep.
And I've interacted with a lot of people in the spirits industry, and you could typically tell when someone's not passionate and it's just a check. And, and you don't get that same experience when someone actually cares and they're like, no, I believe in this. I think you need to try this. I think you should, not every spirit's for everybody, but there's that drive, that motivation, and that passion always resonates and sells, but just speaks better to the average consumer, to the consumer.
I think so too. I end up using this analogy. I remember watching a documentary, like a nature show, talking about bees and how bees have to relocate from time to time based on either their environment becomes toxic or dangerous or is burned down or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So the queen and the colony have to move, and so by the time they move, they settle for a second, and then scouts go out and try to find food in that new environment, that potential, that candidate of new environment. So the scouts go out, and the successful scout bees come back to the colony, and the colony knows who the scout bees are, so they all gather around the scout bee that had the most successful time going and finding food, the way that the colony is going to survive. So the bees all make a circle, and the scout bee orients itself in the direction of the food that it found, and then vibrates while it walks towards it. And the other bees are like, that bee has found something cool that way. I want to go there because that's where I'm going to find nourishment that direction. I thought, if I could just walk in a direction while vibrating with the passion of the thing that I know is over there, then it changes the functional dynamics of whiskey education from memorizing lines and saying the right words and key performance indicators and all the soul sucking crap that goes along with marketing in general
and corporate,
and turn that on its head and extract the potential toxicity of turning people into targeted sacks of money, and instead seeing them for who they are and what you can do to enhance the quality of their lives in that moment. And it's a different way, I think, of handling it. And to your point about harmonic frequencies and the gravity of harmonic frequency, is that people are drawn to passion because there's a lot in functional adult life that is either passionless or a passion pit. So when you see where passion exists, it's like an island, and you're somewhat shipwrecked, and you swim towards the island because there's a life force there that you sort of need. Yeah. And that's what's in the back of my head all the time when I'm talking to people about whiskey.
Yeah, I joke. A good friend of mine, David, he jokes about that. He could listen to someone talk about woodworking or something, as long as they're passionate and love it. And they're like, I can just sit there because I don't know but you love it. So now I'm so invested in what you are speaking about. There's credibility there. And there's like to see that like the light in someone's eyes when they're talking about something also transforms it and brings you into it. So suddenly you're in this rabbit hole. Like, I want to learn how to woodwork because of having this conversation, where something like spirits you could share with someone, like seeing the light in their eyes, seeing how the stories, seeing everything that people speak about it. Like, oh my God, you need to see this and try this, open it up with water. And what that does definitely reign through. I do want to hit on a point because you brought up something I thought was brilliant. You're not just memorizing lines. You wanted to be real about it. With that being said, you also took these steps for rigorous certifications, including Master of Scotch. So tell us about what the Master of Scotch certification entails. Like, what's that process like? Because very real, we don't know what if a brand ambassador or a rep comes through and they can just memorize lines out of a spreadsheet somewhere, and focus on the KPIs and blah, blah, blah. It's like, whatever. But you went above and beyond for this passion.
Yeah, and my part of the benchmarking of whether I'm doing effective work or not is what happens when you ski outside the wake. Somebody is at an event and you're explaining Glenmorangie to them, and they're familiar with Mortlock, and they're like, okay, well, I understand Mortlach and I understand Mortlach's processes, and so how are yours different from theirs? Times 160 distilleries. So you've got to know other people's stuff, because if somebody scratches the veneer of what it is that you've memorized,
Hmm.
then they're going to see the sort of a falsehood behind the mask that is just canned lines. And if you don't have an answer to, well, this is how Mortlock does this, and this is how we do this, and this is what you might run into at Highland Park or Pulteney or whatever, then they're gonna leave feeling like there was a trust, there was a trust bond, a pinky swear that their time was not going to be wasted, and they left with an empty vessel, or at least an emptier vessel than they needed to. So I began to look outside of almost immediately. Well, really, because I was representing Glenmorangie on the wholesale side before I started working for the brand. So there was a need to understand the full portfolio, and then you had to go and speak to what your competitors were doing, not because you wanted to dismantle their sales, or that it was some malevolent force. You just wanted to know this retailer, this license holder, because I was one. I was a liquor license holding entity who needed to make it, failed at that, but who needed to make a living from this license. And so the information that you're sharing with a license holder is the lifeblood of their business. And so if you screw that up, if you underdeliver, you materially impact in a negative way their capacity to feed their families and keep the lights on at their business, and to keep that product flow happening to a consumer base that you hope is being engaged in a passionate way about the end product. So that started back then, but by the time I had access to things like Council of Whiskey Masters and WSITSO Wine and Spirits Education Trust and Edinburgh Whiskey Academy and all these, and the Chartered Institute of Brewing and Distilling, all these channels that you can plug yourself into to enhance your understanding and broaden the scope of your understanding of this medium that you've decided you're a part of, then it just helps to not galvanize. It's not a protection system. You're not trying to ward things off. You just for me, if it's mental hopscotch, I have to understand square one real well before square two and three make any contextual sense at all. Pardon me. So those programs, the structure of those programs was good for my mental hopscotch coefficient, because it broke things down and then built them back up with a more comprehensive understanding of a tree of understanding, as opposed to a sort of a sidewalk of understanding. And yeah, it's rigorous as hell. Each of them is quite rigorous. The Council of Whiskey Masters, you will be mentored by the top names in the industry,
How crucial was
and
that?
I'm sorry.
How crucial was that mentorship and having
It
that?
was huge, absolutely huge, and that goes back to the beginnings of my career as well. Some real key mentors that got me sort of up past the hump of, I don't think I could do that. I was living in Omaha. Who cares? It's the center of everywhere, but it's the middle of nowhere. So who's going to listen to somebody from Omaha? So the mentorship goes back to the beginnings of clear back to 2005, when I got hired in the wholesale industry. I had mentors starting back then, and I've had some of the same ones ever since. But Council Whiskey Masters in particular is built around mentorship, and mentorship by people whose books you've read, whose videos you've watched, whose feet you've studied at, are there in the room, and they're not just, okay, here's the next thing. They're also on exam day. They're like, all right, tell me this and explain this, and let's go deep dive. And when you have to go deep dive with the guy who wrote the book, whose work you've had to study to prepare for that exam, there's no hiding. There is no gray areas. You need to be able to deliver the goods, and it's in certain cases absolutely harrowing. In particular, trying to engage in a blind tasting exam when the person sitting across the table from you is Dave Broom or Charlie McLean, the sort of horsemen of the apocalypse in terms of those guys. Nobody knows more about the category than those guys and the people on their level. And they're all in the room staring you down. Not because they want you to succeed, but they want you to put the time in. And when you don't put the time in, they'll be the first to expose it. So you've got to put the time in, and it's years. I mean, to get through all 4 levels of Castle and Whiskey Master. The first two are facilitated online. So that's, you choose your path in level 1 and level 3. It's either a Scotch path or a Bourbon path, and these are general things. Mm-hmm. And then level 2 and 4. So Certified Whiskey Specialist is Global Whiskeys, and then Master of Whiskey level 4 is Global Whiskeys again. So once you get done with something like Master of Scotch or Master of Bourbon, then there's level 4. And that's another solid year or year and a half of preparation to get to where you can speak fluently anytime with anybody and taste blind and be confident in your conclusions. It takes not only a tremendous amount of time and effort and a substantial chunk of money to get to where you can do those things as effectively enough to earn those certifications. I recommend them. Council Whiskey Masters is one, but there are others, and I recommend them all to the extent that one's means support it. They're game changers, all of them, absolute game changers. End quote. There's that level of intensity and expectation, and the access to the information that comes along with those expectations is second to none.
Now, you spoke one that sounds insanely rigorous, even a year and a half afterwards when you're not, just to get to the night. Yeah. Well, you mentioned about the palate in the blind tasting in front of these horsemen of the apocalypse, as you described.
Mm-hmm.
What, going from music to hospitality, and not necessarily having all this necessary background, was there an evolution of your palate? Did you have to refine it? Do you have to train it specifically? Look, I'm a layman's. I'm kind of just a casual. I'm a guy who drinks. I know a thing or two, but there's a certain level where you hear these experts talking about leather and tea leaves and chocolate and all. Is there a process, or were you always someone who had a refined palate?
There is a process, absolutely. I'm of the opinion that, let's say you just finished your doctorate in music performance, and you're sitting in a Bach concerto with a 5-year-old. You're all hearing the same stuff. It's how much you trained your interpretive voice. The capacity to ingest is one thing. The capacity to discern is built, and it takes a lot. It isn't that your palate is not astute. Everybody's palate's pretty damned astute. It's more how aggressive, how thoroughly and intensively have you developed your internal dialogue, and how much have you been able to work through the sort of the insipid nature of confirmation bias. The trouble with knowing what's in front of you before you drink it is that you've already drawn certain conclusions that are going to set up your sensory apparatus to give you messages that fulfill your expectations, not necessarily to give you a clear picture of what's in the glass. So blind tasting, and a lot of it, with as many different configurations of flavor wheels as you can possibly get a hold of, so that you're not sowing the seeds of the bias that particular flavor wheel has built into it. So that it's essentially you're trying to make the full circuit to self-recognition with a hell of a lot more definition. Blind tasting practice, as much as can be injected into your normal life, you will only benefit from a rigorous schedule of blind tasting, especially if you're trying to get ready for an exam based on blind analysis and identification.
Yeah, I've honestly, I won't even lie, I've been very curious about refining my palate, so to be able to use those identifiers. I think when you mentioned earlier about having the contextual connectors, hey, I know this is what chocolate, raisin, whatever, etc., those kind of points of reference to be able to to distinguish between these flavored notes as you go through is something that I guess often I forget that it's like any other muscle. You can train it, develop it, and stretch it to a point where it's doing well beyond what you've always had it as its default.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to like weight training. I used to be able to bench this, now I could bench that because I've spent time developing that. So that's an interesting perspective, and definitely something that maybe I'll look into.
And the opposite is true. Just like with weight training, it'll atrophy if you don't. So, like, I'm on the judging panel for the Master Scotch, Master Bourbon, Master Whisky exams in October. So I have a tremendous amount of work to do to get my chops back up. This goes back to the music thing. It's working your chops back up, and that's going to take a lot of dedication. It's not as though you don't. It's not as like just like if you played drums and then didn't practice for 6 months, you wouldn't start where you were. Yeah. You've got to go back and rebuild. And so that's my project when I get back off the road starting in middle of June.
You are busy. You are a busy man.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot. And that's the thing about the categories, I'm sure you're aware. Distilled spirits nowadays has a lot of competitors that aren't liquid, whether it's THC seltzers or edibles or whatever it is. You have a new set of competitors that don't speak a common language but are interested in the same target audience. So, okay, why should they pay attention to your stuff versus that stuff? These are inebriatives and these do certain things, and your doctor might tell you that this is a better idea than this or whatever it is. So that constant set of the need to be out there, the market rewards the folks who continue to show up. And my gig is just showing up and delivering the goods as much and as often as I can.
Yeah, that must be exhausting, but I know there's still there's a lot of wins there, right? You see the smile, you see the people, you see the impact, you see those get to enjoy these spirits for the first time. And it's definitely, I feel like that would be one of those industries or businesses that I would enjoy because I could make that memory, create that space for somebody. So definitely understand it's still work. So anyone at home that is like, oh, he's just driving. No, it's work. Even talking about spirits, it's work. Like this
it is. You built this thing. You built this thing because you wanted to communicate about spirits, about your passion for them, your experiences with them, your journey of discovery with them. But as I'm sure that you can attest, there's the fun bits. There's that moment of clarity, that aha moment that you've helped another person achieve, and that's worth all of the mid-tier at best accommodations that a limited budget can afford, all of the nights and weekends away from home, all of the sort of the discomfort. There was an interview. Charlie Watts has been passed away for a while now, but there was an interview back in the day where they asked him about touring. He said, I love the stage, I love the lights, I love to see the people, I love to play the music. The rest of it I can't stand, and that's not where I'm at. I there are elements of that I enjoy: seeing the country and meeting new people and discovering new cultures and spending time the American version of ancient cities like New Orleans. I mean, old places, even though the country's not that old, and new places and places dominated by cultures that I'm not familiar with, and just learning about how all of that came together. That's all fascinating. It has almost nothing to do with the liquid and the transfer of knowledge about the liquid. It has everything to do with the ingestion of cultural nuance that I think informs the narrative of American whiskey too. If you American spirits output is informed by a pretty broad tapestry of microcultures across a pretty big country. So for me to see and live and sort of eat and breathe and soak up those microcultures, it helps me understand, not know an enemy, because I love all that stuff. It's more a matter of, oh, wow, okay. I don't live in Scotland, and I've been there a lot, but so I understand how those micro dialects could show up. But here I get to live them and watch what happens when you talk about the development of American single malt as a thing, or how Texas might manifest a certain Texasness on the bourbons from Texas versus the bourbons from, say, Wisconsin or something. That's a different, all of that stuff ends up being a reflection of the tapestry of the human condition. All this stuff, all of it is the output of people sharing themselves with other people that builds this sort of giant human Tetris game that you get to sort of explore and understand the more you're in it.
Yeah. Actually, so I want to talk a little bit more about Glenmorangie itself. That makes it unique and different. I mean, the brand is recognized. It's the orange bottle, the classic, the original. I know that there's been some changes. Can't wait to talk about that a little bit later. But one of the things that stands out about it, especially when you speak about just single malt Scotch whiskey, is the Giraffe high stills. These, from a technical perspective, like, how does the extreme height and copper contact define that lighter floral spirit? I know that there's a little bit of a lore behind why the Giraffe still even existed initially, but tell us about that in general.
Yeah, reflux, to your point, what you've alluded to there already is the interaction between spirit and copper. Any sort of distillate produced from organic sources is going to have some sulfur content associated with sulfur and sulfur compounds, and a certain oiliness associated with it as well. The more that spirit has contact with copper and struggles, this is pot distillations. Column distillations can be a different thing. But when you're making single malt Scotch whiskey, you have to distill in pots, in batches. So that the dynamics of a pot still are a considerable part of why single malt Scotch whiskey is what it is. So as distillate vapors pass through, and if you look at copper under a microscope, it looks like a scrubby pad. So on the inside of the still, the longer that you can get the spirit vapors to converse, slow down and chat with the copper, the more that sulfur and sulfur compounds will bond with copper. So there's chemical erosion happening inside the still where copper and sulfur are combining into being a thing that carries over into the heads of your distillation run. So as the sulfur is grabbed and hugged and removed from the situation, the more that the fermentation flavors, the more that the raw ingredient flavors can be revealed to a degree. And the height of the thing, shorter stills are going to allow for an oilier distillate because they don't have to struggle quite as hard in terms of vapor points, and the vaporization of those compounds can sneak into the line arm of a shorter still a lot easier than they can in a taller still, because you've got a temperature gradient from the heat source to the top that's more significant. So the oilier, larger molecular compounds they go from a vapor to a liquid at a certain height or distance from the heat source that will condense on the sides of the still, run back down, more copper contact, and then be revaporized until those larger, oilier compounds are broken down into lighter and fruitier and more floral sort of compounds. So reflux, if that's the style of whiskey that you want, lighter, fruitier, floral, then on the front end you got to do a bit of work to create either those flavors or the precursors to those flavors on the fermentation side. And during distillation, you do what you can to reveal them and to keep them from being coated in sulfur and oil. And sometimes oily sulfur is what you want, depending on the cask that you decide that you're going to be using later on. More effusive and robust casks need a more effusive and robust distillate. So you're going to make those decisions based on the style of whiskey that you're going to make. We make a light, fruity, floral style of whiskey. So using hard water helps because yeast is a bit happier or more capable of becoming more efficient because it builds new versions of itself more quickly because the medium is more nutritive. So you get a more vigorous fermentation in a relatively short period of time. Those fermentation flavors are revealed in the taller still. The oiliness is sort of broken down. So there's a lighter, fruitier, floral thing coming through in your distillate. And then we make determinations in terms of the use of cask type that will nurture without burying the nuances that we've created in those first two steps. So the tall still is really, really critical.
Yeah, it's one that stands out when you look at the imagery of distilleries and all that. It's very unique for sure. And everything online, almost every enthusiast or Glenmorangie, that's the first thing to talk about is the Giraffe still. The Giraffe high still. As I looked up a little bit more research, there was like it was a group of gentlemen, I don't remember the name of the show, in the very first thing. Within like 5 minutes, like, oh, we have the the 12-year that used to be the 10 original, and let's talk about this Giraffe high. And it was like 5 minutes in, it was like, oh, all right. So the more and more I did the research, was like, this is unique and kind of sets a little bit of a precedent of what your brand that brand is recognized by. And I think that distinguishing factor is also something that makes it a classic, right?
I think so. And the talk about going back to my distributor days, some of the things that they smash into your head in terms of sales techniques and so on and so forth actually carry through and are quite useful. The supplier that I used to work for on the distributor side was a big fan of the connecting features to benefits. And if you consider a tall still to be a feature, then it doesn't make any sense until you define the benefit. You can talk about drafts until you're blue in the face, and we can talk about hard water till we're blue in the face, and the use of, restricting our use of ex-bourbon up to first and second fill only. Those are just words until you make them make sense to people in terms of the benefit to them. How does it manifest itself in a liquid, and how does that is the manifestation of that benefit them as the consumer of the thing? That leads back to the need to be as well versed in the category as you can be, because the benefit is not as obvious as the feature, and the connection happens when the feature is tied to the benefit. So that's that tall still thing. All of that has to manifest itself in something meaningful to the consumer, or it's just a thing that looks like a copper giraffe.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, then the benefit feature just becomes a gimmick. And adds no.
It's just a talking point.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you're not any different than this. Tell me why that's this, and when you speak to it, it makes much more sense where your brand would stand out versus someone else's.
Yep,
so,
yep. And giraffes, it's like I stopped being fascinated by them intrinsically, and by about the age of 4. I think they're quite cool as things, but it's not just here's a giraffe. And you don't, okay, now I'm good for the rest of the day. That wears off after preschool, so it needs to mean something. The reference needs to mean something, or it just sounds like one of those canned, memorized, usurious, secretly caustic lines that get you off a hook of having to explain a thing because you've distracted somebody with big, tall, spotty animals.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I feel like some of those memorized lines that I've heard some reps use before are just those kind of like a bouncing, look over, jingle my keys somewhere else. Look over here, because I have no idea how to answer your question.
Yep.
When I worked in the spirits industry, or like with liquor sales and reps out, they would always, that doesn't mean anything. What you just said meant nothing. It's like, no, it's like, what you just said is exactly the same mash bill like 5 other brands make. So why is yours different? Like, I don't understand why this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And when you catch them, it's like a deer in headlights. It's like,
yep. When you see them in these presentations, and they're usually tied to PowerPoints, and they're usually using the same sort of canned lines about the finest ingredients and the finest casks and all this. Okay, so you're the only distillery that buys the finest casks. Everybody else is the second best. It's fundamental dishonesty, wrapped up as this kind of slogan that, unbeknownst to you, because you've only memorized your lines, everyone else is using the same line.
Yeah.
So now it's a useless line, because now it's just noise, and it exposes you as the somewhat undereducated charlatan that you've accidentally become.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because we knew the reps that were just like, I don't believe him. Don't let him just bring in a palate of whatever he's telling you. But you spoke about cask maturation. Well, one of the things that we know, especially with all this, the bourbons and whiskeys, everyone that we've had on the show, is that there's a scarcity in kind of like a wood. It's, how can I put this? Making sure that you utilize the resources that are available at the perfect timing is very important to your spirits, especially when you're thinking about, like, people who are very focused on making sure that everything is good for the environment, and we're making sure that we're keeping conscious of those things and not being wasteful and all of the things that make sense, right? We can only use casks so many times, all that. Your brand, we talked about wood managing, and specifically the logistics of transporting, the barrels to prevent sulfur issues so that it's not wasted. Like, why is timing, and what goes into that process for them to ensure that time is money? Do I have enough time to waste on an error or just not calculating that time correctly?
The greater concern in terms of cask spoilage comes from casks that had previously held either wines or fortified wines because the ABV was too low to be able to keep mold and bacteria growth at bay. So
I did not know that.
yeah, so if you buy an ex-bourbon oak, there's not really there's nothing that the bourbon has left behind that bacteria and mold can snack on. But if you're talking about like sherry casks in particular, the part of the reason that you use a sherry cask is the fond, what the sherry left behind. If you think about it in these terms, how much of the liquid that occupied that cask before is neither alcohol nor water? In the case of wines and fortified wines, there are a lot of things in those liquids that once the alcohol and the water vaporize out, you're left with residual solids. And those solids have a certain level of either sugar or other metabolizable carbohydrates associated with them that mold and bacteria could feed on. Ex-bourbon oak, you're more concerned about whether it dries out before you get it than anything. So they usually put some water in there to keep it from drying out because they're all held together just with pressure. And if the stave seize up, then the pressure goes away and the structural integrity of the cask is shot and all that kind of stuff. But it's really the ones you have to worry about are the casks whose previous occupant was a relatively low ABV compared to distilled spirits, because they're going to have more spoilage issues because there's more about them that was neither alcohol nor water, and that will be left behind in the cask as a dissolved residual solid fund that you, on the plus side, are looking to harvest, which is why you'd use those casks. But on the downside, you're looking to get them quickly and fill them quickly before mold and bacteria get a hold of the inside of that cask. So yeah, in the case of sherry casks, port casks, wine casks of any kind, you got to go. You got to get those in, and you got to fill them quick, because you don't want to have to rely on sulfur treatments and sulfur candling and anything like that, because that's going to affect the flavor outcome more so than a lot more than you want it to, because now you're, as a distiller, now you're having to work around an impediment as opposed to working with a conducive medium. You're having to drive around the accident on the interstate as opposed to just driving down the interstate. And so, yeah, you've got to be conscious of that stuff. And there are in Europe, Spain in particular, the coopers that create the producers of the casks that the bulk of the industry uses are very much aware of that situation. So the shipping time from beginning to end is quite rapid. And when we're getting a hold of so especially casks or casks that we'd never used before, the sourcing of those casks is a rush ship situation for sure when we're talking about wines, fortified wines, and non-distilled spirits cask types. It has to be fast, to your point, where you've got mold problems for sure. But on the ex-bourbon oak side, it's not as big a deal as the cask drying out.
And with the ex-bourbon barrels, you only use those twice, correct, to get the...
We do, that's true. Once we're done with them, they'll go, not all of them, but an appropriate chunk of them will go to Ardbeg for a third fill. So Ardbeg is one of those distillates that if Glenmorangie is a distillate that you handle with a certain kid glovery, then Ardbeg, you bludgeon it, and it still is whatever the hell it wants to be. You can club that thing to just into submission, and it still won't submit, which is one of the things that I love about Ardbeg. Ardbeg is more Ardbeggy than it's just sort of, oh, that's what you want me to do? We'll see.
Stubborn spirit.
Yeah, it is, and I respect the hell out of it for that reason. It's not that Glenmorangie lays down and plays dead. It's just that it rewards one's capacity to work with it in a nuanced and subtle way. It's easy. It would be easy to overwhelm it with superfluous or unartistically applied cask influence, which is what Bill's job is. Dr. Bill Lemsner, our master distiller, who happens to be master distiller for Ardbeg as well. So he's got to go from white gloves to boxing gloves, moving from distillery to distillery in terms of the creative process.
He's also the one who pioneered the extra maturation in the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah, he took the bones of what already existed and expanded the daylights out of it. So when he arrived at Glenmorangie in 1995, the first whiskey that Glenmorangie produced that met the criteria for being a wood finish whiskey was released in 1987. So it was a thing that Glenmorangie had been toying with, an idea that they'd been toying with. Bill showed up and saw the potentials and expanded it to the nth degree. So when and he'll bristle at it, sometimes he gets credit as being the father of wood finishing. He just took a thing and made it big time. I mean, it wasn't a thing that he invented. He just saw significant benefit, significant potential upside to the enhancement of the creative process. A lot more tools in the toolbox. A palette with a hell of a lot more colors associated with it, which was, of course, going to feed his artistic sense a whole lot more sort of goodies.
So there's a goodie that I did see online as well. I think I'm pronouncing it Signet.
Signet, nice, well done, yeah.
So it's a high roasted chocolate malt with a roasted espresso or something. I was reading on, which as a guy who loves his coffee, really excited me to hear about this. So what is Signet exactly?
Signet, it's difficult to put Signet on a petri dish and tell you everything about it because the whiskey creation team at Glenmorangie, which includes Dr. Bill Lumsden and our master blender Julian McDonald, there are at least a couple components of what becomes Signet that they ain't telling anybody about. And it's a competitive chip.
Of course.
The card up the sleeve. I can tell you the bulk of what's happening there. There's the heart of Signet, the distillate that becomes the recognizable heartbeat of the Signet concept.
Yes.
Is a distillate that we create for 10 days a year, the Signet Week, which runs into 10 days. And Signet Week, everything has to sort of be recalibrated and set up to deal with a mash bill that is 80% pale malt, what we would normally be using, plus 20%, which is quite a lot, high roast chocolate malt barley. So if let's say you're making a stout, unless you were going to get real aggressive with the stout, you might be in the 12, 15% or so. Modified barleys are difficult to work with in a lot of, and we'll get to that in a second. They're difficult to work with, and they can be quite potent in terms of their flavor characteristics. If you were selling the fermentation base, i.e. beer, then you're capitalizing on all the flavor potential of the roasted barley, regardless of the fact that it can't make alcohol. You're selling your fermentation base. That's fine. But if you're using modified barleys and you have to rely on the volatilization or the vaporization of flavor characteristics from roasted barley to make it into your distillate, then you've got to be pretty careful and you've got to kind of load the box a bit and use a bit more. The trouble with using more modified barleys, more Maillard reaction or heat degradation byproduct barleys, is that you increasingly destroy their capacity to produce alcohol. So high roast chocolate malt barley in and of itself, if you tried to make a whiskey from 100% high roast chocolate malt barley, it would have an alcohol content of 0 because roasted barleys, their diastatic power, so their enzymes are destroyed. The capacity, the thing about making whiskey in Scotland is that the enzymatic power, the diastatic power, the enzymes it takes to break starches into sugars that yeast can eat and create alcohol have to come from the grain itself. They have to be endogenous, come from the grain itself. They can't be exogenous. They can't come from other sources. So if you destroy a barley's capacity to convert its own starches into sugars, you got a problem. So that we're gonna cut that the mash bill off at 20% high roast chocolate malt barley. So then that 80-20 blend of barleys goes into our traditional roller mill, which works great for pale malt. But once you've cooked the living hell out of a chunk of barley, it's quite brittle. And it explodes. It basically kind of turns into sort of coffee flavored barley dust as part of the milling process. So now you have flow issues in terms of how your wort, your sugary liquid that you're creating from your ground up barley and hot water, how that flows out of your mash tun, because that's just a perforated floor. And you usually rely on the husks of barley, which are non-soluble, insoluble fiber. You usually rely on those as a secondary filter bed. But in roasted barley, you burn the husk off, so there is no husk. So now you've got your mash that's not cooperating, your flow rate out of your mash tun that can be quite difficult. So you're gonna have to mess with the rate that your mash rate moves around and the depth, and so you're gonna need full outer tun and all that kind of stuff to make sure that your mash tun flow rate doesn't get stuck. A stuck mash is a very expensive and useless thing. So that becomes an issue. And then in fermentation, because 20% of that malt can't produce alcohol, then your ABV yield in terms of what fermentation is going to produce in terms of target ABV that then you're going to distill is going to be lower by a factor of approximately 20%, regardless of how long you ferment it. So it becomes, if you haven't seen the suggested retail price of Signet, at least part of that reflects then it's expensive as hell to make. So, a bottle sitting on a shelf at $260 or $270, depending on your market, that has no age statement, that tells you almost nothing about itself, and you can hardly see. That's a fairly, let's take some hubris on our part. But the way that whiskey is assembled is unique to it. There is nothing like it in the production of Scotch whiskey, and that surprises even Dr. Bill, which is at least part of why the sleeves are up, the cards up the sleeve. But nobody's trying to duplicate it, which is quite pleasant for us, but also quite surprising. So you've got your core distillate that you make for 10 days a year, and if you happen to find yourself at the distillery during Signet Week, the fermenters look like they're full of Guinness, and the whole place smells like a coffee shop.
I love Guinness and I love coffee.
So, yeah, and you'd love it if you can nail Signet Week, which I think is around May-ish or something, maybe around now-ish. I'd have to verify that. If you decide you're going to go, we'll try to target it. But once that distillate is created, that will become, after maturation, that will become one of 7 or 8-ish whiskeys that become assembled. The assemblage of Signet is 7 or 8 singular Glenmorangie component whiskeys that are then woven together to become Signet, some of which are very old, some of which have seen a significant amount of time in Oloroso sherry cask after primary maturation, ex-bourbon oak, some made from barley that we've grown ourselves on our own on the Cadwell fields, some that sits in what are known somewhat confusingly as Glenmorangie designer cask, which could be another entire episode, and then at least 2 components that the whiskey creation team ain't telling anybody about. So then that gets vatted, cut to 46 ABV, not chill filtered, and out the door is Signet.
That sounds delicious. And
it's fantastic. There's nothing like it, and it's really a delicious dram. It's one that when the first time you have Signet, it's almost like, okay, the portion of my life that existed before this moment was that portion, and now the rest of it is sort of the after Signet,
Life after Signet.
Yeah, exactly.
A whole separate documentary for 2026. It's like, totally. I want to talk to you about what happened to me before.
Yeah, those were dark times.
No pun intended. Dark times before today. Everything else was a culmination of everything that got me here. But yeah, that's awesome. But it sounds delicious, and I won't lie to you. I didn't look at the retail. I just went right now. I was like, I don't know. It's probably in the budget. No, but it sounds amazing, and it sounds very unique. And to your point, I haven't seen anything else like this. But let's talk about those statements that we do have in front of us.
Oh, yes.
And the ones that let's start with the infamous or famous, the original 12. Mm-hmm. Now, I did end up getting taken care of a little bit. Wait, which camera knows better?
Good. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Nice.
And currently right now drinking the 15.
Oh, beautiful. That's fantastic.
So everyone at home, I've had more than I expected to already. Keep sneaking it.
Lasanta will do that to you. It encourages a second dram of course. Very nicely.
But talk to us about the 12. I have had the 12 in the past, but it used to be the 10, so I don't... the flagship has moved. So tell us about that a little bit.
It has, and that's to have a thing be a thing for 70 years straight. Glenmorangie was associated with a 10-year-old product as its flagship for 70 years before 2020, late 2024 came along, and it became a 12. And there wasn't a lot of fanfare associated with it. It was just all of a sudden the number changed, but there was a hell of a lot of grappling going on the whiskey creation team side. If you think about, so Glenmorangie is 183 years old this year. Over the course of its lifespan, it has been one of those distilleries that has looked to the future as we're convinced that our best days lie ahead. We've done some fantastic things, but the minute that we believe that our best days are behind us, the minute that the evolutionary process no longer makes sense. And sometimes whiskey, particularly Scotch whiskey, is seen as this crystalline sort of the mosquito and amber on the end of David Attenborough's cane.
Great reference.
It isn't. Yeah, it doesn't have to be that. I mean, there are some distilleries who take care of that. They stay home and they do the thing that Springbank jumps into my head because they do what they've always done. Not that they're innovation free. They've done some really, really cool stuff that they didn't do 200 years ago. But if you go there and you look at their processes and you talk to their people, very little has changed in the way that they make whiskey at Springbank. And I went to Springbank school in 2022. And I found it utterly fascinating. It looked like a sort of a Victorian era workhouse, and they work you to the bone, and you're just 10 hours a day, and you're soaked. Even through your high vis is like draining, soaked, because it's all manual. There's really no real automation happening there. The mash rakes, sure, but in terms of people power, make Springbank happen. And so they've taken care of they are the stewards of the past, and that's great. What we've done at Glenmorangie is to continue this purposeful, slow, but stepped evolution moving forward. If you think about the flagship expression of Glenmorangie, it tends to be the basis by which we create new sort of variations on that. If that's the theme, Glenmorangie Original 12, or original is the theme, then a good chunk of what we do is variations on that theme. So in the process of evolution, if your theme doesn't evolve, then you're a bit tethered to its stationary motion. So it became time, after year 181 and a half had gone by, to look deep into the soul of Glenmorangie and decide what the next purposeful, slow, stepped evolutionary process was for the flagship, because it had been 70 years since it had been looked at. So that became not just 2 more years how to do it. It was a lot more grappled with and thought out and wrestled with by the whiskey creation team, because they didn't want to do is to lose the brand's, the distillery and brand's identity in a sea of ambition or innovation for the sake of innovation that tasted nothing like Glenmorangie. So what those extra 2 years gave us, combined with a revamped look at the ratio between first and second fill ex bourbon oak, gave us this new thing, this new original which is an oxymoron, but this new original that presents original, but there are a couple chapters at the end of the book that maybe weren't there before that provide a richness and a nuance and a depth and a presence on the palate that continues to give just a little bit more. The tenure, the bright, citrusy, floral, beautiful, well, really well rendered, just enough sweetness, a ton of approachability. This is those things that are a little more rounded, a little more comfortable in their own skin, a little bit more patient in the urgency with which they deliver their messaging, and then just a little bit more stratification of complexity towards the mid palate back that you might not have run into quite as effusively in the 10-year.
Okay. And did you feel that most consumers initially were kind of like hesitant, like, what are we doing here? Did you have to win over those people that loved the original, or was that an easy, they knew the brand, they trust the brand, and it was just simple for them to accept? Because I know some people just don't like change. There are some
No,
people out there that
they
hate change.
they don't. The hardcore Glenmo folks, yeah, there was some talking and discussing and experiential tasting that needed to happen. But the thing about Glenmorangie is that it doesn't, like, we're sister distilleries with Ardbeg, and I end up finding myself saying a lot of times, you're not going to see a whole lot of people out there with Glenmorangie tattooed on themselves, but you're going to see a hell of a lot of people with Ardbeg tattooed on themselves, because it's a little bit more like like tandem hang gliding with somebody with thousands of hours of hang gliding experience is Glenmo. Straight up skydiving, first time by yourself, sort of flirting with the forces beyond the known. That's Ardbeg. It is the intensity. It's not cheating death, but when you taste it, you can't untaste Ardbeg. That's one of the things that Ardbeg talks about a lot. There's an intensity there there's an urgency associated with Ardbeg, and there's a patience associated with Glenmo that keeps Glenmo from being tattooed on people's souls. It speaks to them, but it doesn't, and Ardbeg doesn't scream at them either. But Ardbeg is in the room if they feel like screaming. There's a catharsis that happens when you drink Ardbeg that I think there's a harmony that happens when you drink Glenmo. There's a catharsis that happens when you drink Ardbeg. So the number of people who are upset about the 10 going to a 12, those people aren't necessarily wired to pitch a giant fit. And we have to unflatter ourselves that being the number 4 single malt in the world is a bit like finishing 4th at the Olympics. Everybody knows the first 3. So as much as a lot of people know what Glenmorangie is, there's the target on our back is smaller. The ubiquitous knownness of the brand is lower. So we can do things like that, and we've sort of set of expectations up that we evolve, that not shape shift, and that we're flighty and we can't commit to anything, but that Bill is an artist, that he answers to Bill. And he's always going to put something in a bottle that's going to be extraordinary. So we got less pushback and more, all right, let's see. We'll see how this goes. And generally, it's been quite a positive thing for most consumers, I think.
Okay. And with our next age statement, that also got bumped up 2 years with the La Santa.
Mm-hmm. It did, yeah. And
3 years, it says. I have
yes, and the cask makeup changed too. We didn't tell anybody that, but we're telling you now.
I was like,
yeah. Not that it's like the big reveal, but going back to when we were talking about the first wood-finished whiskey, marketed as a wood-finished whiskey, was Glenmorangie 1963 that was released in 1987. The Balvenie guys are going to tune into this and scream about how much I'm not telling people that they did it first. So I'm going to tell them they did it first. Glenmorangie Balvenie Classic was the first secondary matured single malt Scotch whiskey released. They didn't tell anybody because they knew they'd get in trouble with the SWA. So they just did it, and they didn't tell anybody, and that was fine. It was fine. We did it and told people, got in trouble, and marketed and coined the phrase wood-finished whiskey. So we were the first to release a wood-finished whiskey, marketed as wood-finished whiskey. They were the first to do it, but they didn't tell anybody. And that's okay. 2 different sets of motivation. So when the 63 came out, the secondary cask type was Oloroso. So it was ex-bourbon, long time, Oloroso for 18 months at the end. That's been the sort of the first variant of Glenmorangie was ex-bourbon oak into Oloroso. This, the 15-year, returns to that. We had dialed in some PX to go with the Oloroso in about 2017 or so, when it was still a 12-year. But in the 15, we returned to the roots of Glenmorangie finished in sherry cask by getting rid of the PX sherry influence and focusing on first fill Oloroso only. It also serves that sort of the narrative of knowing what you're talking about for the sake of the consumer. Sherry isn't just sherry. Sherry is a lot of things. So if the subtle and not so subtle nuances between, say, Manzanilla and a PX are unknown to the consumer, then that missing information can't help them to make determinations about what they may be able to expect that whiskey to taste like. So you got to go study your sherry in order to understand the category, because different gradations and oxidation levels and sweetness levels of sherry are going to have a massive impact on the whiskeys that are matured in those casks. So the elimination of PX, which is quite sweet, took that sort of center palate, unctuous, chewy, lingering sweet note in Lasanta 12 and gave us the 15, which has some extra gears in the gearbox, but that center palate, sticky, unctuous thing is replaced by a sort of a not a desert landscape, but it's a bit drier, it's a bit broader. The horizon just kind of goes and goes and goes, and there's much less of a frame around the art. And I like how it manifests. It's sort of a drying, slightly spicy, sure chewy, but not unctuously sweet chewy.
That's first time I'm trying it today, and this is actually surprisingly smooth. It's
just beautiful.
It's beautiful.
It's a beautiful dram.
And I was reading it, it's like aged in bourbon and sherry casks, as you described. But even those flavor notes, and I know that we talked about power suggestion, but so that's why I purposely left the notes down until I already tried it to kind of get perspective. We recently had Bobby DeMars on. He does this program called Blind Barrels. They send you this very much mystery pack of blind tastings where you can't know what it is until you scan a QR code, and you have to do this extra steps to find out. So since he's introduced me to that, shouts to Bobby. Fantastic product, fantastic interview. I try to approach everything without looking at anything online first. It's because I think there's value in it to not, one, believe just because if a label says something, it is true. And two, I need to experience my own version, right? We have different perspectives, different historical context to pull from, as you spoke about earlier. This is fantastic. And I noticed like the chocolate smell, the flavor, and it kind of comes off like, I hear people say baking spices, but it tastes like cinnamon. I try not to like sound pretentious.
It tends to lead the baking spices bands, is the one with the bass drum doing this, or the one with this. That's cinnamon.
Yeah, cinnamon is such that's always been one of my favorite flavors, and with that comes synonymous, at least in my mind, with raisins, cinnamon raisins, and all that. So this is actually go ahead.
Sherry will do that to you. The dried fruit and cinnamon combined sherry casks are really good at marrying those two things together.
Yeah, and it still maintains those vanilla notes from a bourbon cask a little bit. So, I don't know. I would have just drank this all by myself if I didn't have to be on an interview.
I would not have blamed you at all.
I'm going to have to wrap this up and just do some deep dives. I have to do a deep dive into this. But
yes,
definitely fantastic. So and this is not even because not because you're here. If anyone's not tried this and you're a bourbon enthusiast, try this. 100%. I strongly recommend.
Good. I'm glad you're liking it. I'm a big fan of what we've done with the 15. I loved and respected the 12. I find myself craving the 15, which is, I think, is a different engagement level for me.
It's delicious. But I was torn because the next one was the triple cask, because I didn't want to open two at a time. I didn't want to. It is a weekday.
It is. Damn it. You're right.
Exactly. But so when I saw that it says like bourbon, new, charred oak, and rye for the triple cask reserve, I'm a massive rye fan. How does blending those three very distinct woods in just mash bills and flavor profiles, how does that work? How does that become a thing?
Yeah, it's a great question, because to your point, those two cask types tend to be giant highway flares for American whiskey in terms of flavor characteristics, color characteristics, aromatic characteristics. Those tend to be the big highway road flares that move in that direction. What we did not want to do is to put a thing in a bottle that masqueraded as American whiskey with the word Glenmorangie on it. There would be no point in that. American whiskey makers make American whiskey. It'd almost be mocking. It'd make ourselves look ridiculous in an impossible attempt to mock a thing we couldn't recreate if we tried. So what we wanted to do One of the things I'm proudest of about Glenmorangie is that it is a very wide open doorway to the category of single malt Scotch whiskey, which doesn't always have the widest open door. So we invite a lot of people into the category by providing a big padded open and throw rose petals at their feet and invite them in. This thing invites people from a category that isn't us into the category that is us with at least a couple of flags of familiarity. Glenmorangie presented with, oh, I recognize dill or something. I recognize that herbal spice that I might run into in my favorite rye, but it's not overwhelming. I recognize a slightly elevated, maybe a vanilla toasted coconut sea salt caramel thing that comes from the new oak that makes me as an American whiskey drinker slightly more comfortable in an unfamiliar territory. All we're really trying to do is to open the doors even a bit wider and to give folks particularly in the American whiskey category, consumers of American whiskeys, give them someplace comfortable to sit down in our living room.
I love that because, to your point, there are people who are looking for some familiar taste or flavor profile.
Yeah.
So and I also like experimenting, right? You have to try some new things. So there's a aspect of curiosity there. It's like, what the heck? What is this all about? Mm-hmm. And also the familiarity. Like, well, at least if you're a big rye enthusiast, it's going to attract you, and you're going to sit there and go, at least hey, let's give it a try. I know I like high rise. I know I like this. I know I like this, and you can kind of gravitate towards it. But it seemed very different. I know that we talked earlier about pushing boundaries and some of the things that Glenmorangie does. There are certain runs and I guess special releases that I found really interesting. Tale of Tokyo, Tale of the Forest, and getting creative. What stood out about Tale of Tokyo and Tale of the Forest, and how does that balance from, as you've described it, this traditional? It's Glenmorangie's known. Ardbeg is screaming and jumping, free diving. Glenmorangie is very practical. I'm not practical. I would hate to say practical.
But still, no. I mean, I get where you're going with that.
Yeah, practical sounds boring, but it's not.
Steadfast. Maybe. Yeah.
Better, way better. How do you think? What is a Tale of Tokyo and a Tale of the Forest?
We'll start with A Tale of the Forest because it was probably the most befuddling, baffling interface that we've created in quite some time.
Okay.
The whole idea. So, Dr. Bill is an intellectually restless creature. He is interested in what has yet to be known and what has yet to be accomplished or attempted. He's also a relatively robust contrarian. So if someone says it can't happen, that's the first thing he's going to prove can happen.
I like him already.
The third thing that he does is he carries very little fear of anything around in his soul and in his creative process. So in the case of, let's just take peat, for example. People who love Glenmorangie tend not to necessarily love peated whiskey. People who love peated whiskey tend not to drink a tremendous amount of Glenmorangie. So when you produce a peated Glenmorangie, you appeal to Bill, basically. So what he did there was, I want to try a thing. We've done lightly peated Glenmorangie in the past, and they've been quite good. As a matter of fact, if you go back to pre-1980, when Glenmorangie had its own malting floors, those old school Glenmos have a hint of smoke in them because there would have been some peat that would have driven the thermal resources that would have been used to run the malting floors of Glenmorangie. He decided, all right, I'm going to lightly peat some Glenmorangie barley, but here's a thing I've never tried. What if I surreptitiously discussed with the malting agency inserting some things into the kiln that wouldn't normally be inserted into the kiln, knowing full well that we were going to take a ration of crap for it, which we did from the SWA in particular, the Scotch Whisky Association. Oh. So he convinced them to toss juniper berries and birch bark and heather blossoms in the kiln with the peat. The way that barley works is as long as the husk is wet, the smoke will permeate the husk, and then over the course of creating your mash, since that's the insoluble fiber element, your mash liquid ends up draining through the husks. And then you drag all of that interesting stuff out, all those compounds out of the husk and impart it into your fermentation base. So, yeah, peat, sure. But also the flavor of juniper berries and heather blossoms and birch bark. Juniper, it turns out, is juniper oil is quite flammable. So his thought was, you can't tell me that in the 1680s or whatever, any time between 1494 and the advent of modern distillation practice, that flammable things wouldn't have ended up in kilns or to dry barley. Can't tell me that. And this stuff all exists naturally in Scotland. So somebody did this at some point.
Yeah.
I want to do it again to see what happens. So the result, A Tale of the Forest, bottled at 46 ABV, was matured in a combination of ex-bourbon oak and Oloroso casks, but it was a barley story first and foremost. It was about what had happened in the kilning phase of the barley. We wanted to preserve that in the final product. So what comes out of the bottle for me tastes a little bit like you combined a lightly peated single malt Scotch whiskey with a barrel-aged Dutch Genever. You sort of jam them together into this thing. It was polarizing. I will be the first to admit that it was maybe the most polarizing whiskey that we've produced in my career at Glenmorangie. So people either loved it or they really didn't. I was one of the people who really loved it. And the thing about those limited time offerings, the Tale of series, all of those are single batches. So that's where you're going to do your experimentation work.
Okay.
And so you limit, let's say the public is really not into it. Isn't that much, there isn't that much to worry about. But you get to push the envelope and do some things that you wouldn't do to your regular range. It was the juniper that pissed the SWA off, like badly. And the fact that we use the term botanicals on the packaging, don't ever do that again, because we're the forgiveness versus permission people. And then the second thing was, when you talk about it in like actual verbal marketing, you can't say botanicals, you got to say combustibles. So combustibles were used in the kilning of the barley that became part of Tale of the Forest.
That is,
yeah.
I did not know that, and I've honestly
as well.
I've seen it in that one. Gave me pause. I was like, I don't know enough about this, but
it's a wild ride. It's wild.
I saw that.
I think it's delicious,
I'm
but
gonna have to find it, just to try it out at least once.
Yeah, and Taylor Tokyo was another one of those examples of haven't done it, but I need to. That was Bill hadn't gotten a chance to use Mizunara as a cask type in the way that he wanted to. First fill and first use, new oak, Mizunara cask. And so when he got permission to spend the ungodly amount of money it took to get those casks made, which is approximately $6,000 a cask. Yeah, because that wood, to your point, trees have got to be at 250 years old before they're mature enough to harvest any kind of harvestable, cooperable wood. And there's only about 20% of the tree that's cooperable anyway, because it grows all curly and stuff. And the fact that it doesn't form, this guy gets a little wood chemistry geek, but Quercus alba, American white oak, works really well because of tyloses formation. There are these little membranes that block the old growth channels. So the new growth channel happens, the old ones are blocked off by these little membranes, so that liquid transfer and nutrient transfer is focused in the current growth. So when you're talking about European oak varieties and then technically Quercus mongolica variant crispula, Mizunara oak, the thing about it is that the tyloses don't form, so its capillary channels will leak, and so Mizunara is a notoriously leaky wood. And so you end up, and that's out of the ends of it, because your staves are made from these capillary channels, these growth patterns that go this way. So that they tend to leak out of the ends, and ours did as well. So you've got to be very careful in how you cooper it. This is good. This is true for European oaks as well. You have to wedge split it. You can't quarter saw. I'm sure you've been to a cooperage here in the States, and they quarter saw their white oak. Yeah. They can, because of tyloses formation. They can disrupt capillary channels because of all these little membranes blocking the capillary channels. But if you go to European cooperages or cooperage in Japan, they're wedge splitting with like pneumatic wedges. They're splitting those oaks so that they disrupt fewer capillary channels. as they're creating what become the blanks and then the staves and then the casks. But no matter what you do with Mizunara, it's going to leak pretty significantly.
I find it so fascinating. Obviously, we can't go through the whole run of everything, but there's other flavors and other
yes, absolutely,
statements that are so interesting. Let me see. We have the Quinta Ruban, the Tale of the Spices. We have the Palo Coltado. Like the fact that nectar actually sounds delicious. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Nectar 16 is amazing.
Nectar sounds right up my alley. So definitely worth checking out. But I know we could do a whole other episode just talking about the Tale series. As we close out, I do have some other, just some rapid fire questions I'd like to ask you guys. But specifically for you, if you had to pair the 18-year-old dram with any specific album or legendary drum track, what would you be listening to?
You sent me that question, and I've been thinking about it nonstop ever since. Because it's like choosing among.
Did I sent you the right question?
Yes, absolutely. It's like choosing amongst your children, kind of a thing. If I had to pick one, exactly. If I had to pick one, and I've given this an inordinate amount of thought, so thank you for the thought-provoking question. 18 and the album Regata de Blanc were released by the Police in 1979. There's space in that record, particularly the track Walking on the Moon. Okay. When I consume 18 year, from the moment it hits my palate, the gravity goes away. I become weightless, and I'm just sort of floating there in this moment that gives me this sort of semblance of the cosmos in my head. You know, the borders are gone, and time is gone, and gravity is gone, and terrestrial anything is gone. You're hanging there in this void, this extraordinarily beautiful void. And that track, particularly Walking on the Moon, from the opening sequence, it's just little tiny, it's a hi-hat with a bit of delay on it. And you're just getting set up for this thing. And then the track starts, and you've got the bass line that's doubled with a subtle piano below it. And then Andy Summers, I think it's a minor 11th chord, and so the modifying note, the couple of notes, it's just this thing, and the sonics of it put you in this space, and I think 18 does that for me too. It puts you in a space and just lets you hang there as long as you want. That album for me was real formative in terms of. The first time I listened to it was not 1979, but it was about 1982. And it changed everything. It changed everything about what I thought of music. I wasn't even really considering drums until that album and subsequent Police albums came along. And it was like, how on earth do you just hit things? And then magic comes from the hitting of things. It changed a lot of how it changed my wiring in really important ways. And 18 for me is the whiskey that changed my wiring in terms of what a whiskey could do.
Beautiful. Good. I just added it while you were saying I added it to the playlist to see.
Right on. Then there's about 4 other albums that I would put on there if it hadn't been for that one, including Massive Attack's Mezzanine, Radiohead's Amnesiac, Beastie Boys' Ill Communication.
You already picked your favorite kid, Daniel.
Exactly. Margaret Glaspie, the Emotions and Math. That is an outstanding album. But anyway, awesome. Regata de Blanc.
And last but not least, so I am working on a project, right? So a little side cocktail project called I Should Make a Drink for That, and where I find inspiration from other things, media, music, movies, anything. If you were to design a Glenmorangie cocktail inspired by your favorite movie or album,
right on,
what would the movie and kind of the drink vibe should be?
The movie would be my favorite movie on earth, which is Little Big Man, starring Dustin Hoffman. It's a story. There's humor, there's tragedy, there's suffering, there's triumph, there's everything, and it's so well told. It's so nuanced and so patient. The soundtrack is awesome and patient. I think I would start with a Fino Sherry base of some kind. And then I would probably work with either Triple Cask Reserve or
Triple Cask Reserve could be good because it has a lot
or Original 12. I think if I was to work with La Santa, it might be a little gilding of lilies, but I think I'd work with original and a Finno sherry base. Probably maybe a little bit of like a nut oil or something like that, like an almond oil, drop of almond oil in there, or a walnut oil,
You could make
and just a little bit of a citrus note, or just enough acid to balance everything out, and maybe a tiny bit of high grade honey in there.
So
I think would be
so similar, kind
like
of like a sherry finished whiskey sour type of deal, or something close.
Yeah,
to that.
something like that.
Oh.
Or one of my favorite drinks out there is an Old Pal. So I might sub the dry vermouth for Finno sherry in an Old Pal.
I like that. When you said the sherry, I was like, you could use that to make it different kind of variations of Manhattans or old fashions, or something like a velvet old fashioned, something similar to that.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. Absolutely.
Man, Daniel, it's been a blast, and now I have a new album to listen to. Now I have an old a movie to watch, and some spirits to enjoy them with. Where can everyone find you? What else does Glenmorangie have coming up, or what would you like to make sure that people are aware of? Like, how could they learn more about the brand and every exciting project you have coming?
Right on. Here's what I would do. Well, first of all, I guess I'm at Glenmodan on Instagram, so GLENMODAN on Instagram. I do what I can to provide some mode of entertainment there. MH Whiskey Central. We're about to launch that, and that's just MHWHISKY Central.com. Sort of a clearinghouse for information about the brand, including a searchable cocktail database that you can search based on the expression that you want to make a cocktail from. And we're about to launch a thing in May that the communications embargo is still in place, but I had some last night and it's really damn good. And the fact that the embargo, not the embargo, but the launch date is May the 4th may give you a sense of who we might have worked with in order to make that whiskey happen. But it's quite good. And I'm very excited for the launch of that. So that's what's coming up. And I'll just be on the road for the rest of the year doing education and advocacy work. We'll do the Council Whiskey Masters exams in October, which I'm really, really looking forward to. And then I may go out again this year throughout December with Drammers Club and do a 3-week tour of the eastern half of the country, visiting Drammers chapters for 3 weeks straight, which is always a blast.
Awesome. It sounds like a really May the 4th. You just made a bunch of my listeners that are nerds really excited. It's like their ears just perked. What?
Yeah.
You want to talk Star Wars right now?
There's a certain amount of celebrity fatigue out there in the whiskey world. Suspend that part of your collective and just drink this stuff. It's really damn good.
Yeah, I could imagine that. There's some fatigue there for sure. We've spoken about it before, but not to get into that other.
There's a lot. There's another episode you could easily dig into there. Exactly,
Dan. It has been so much fun having you on. For those at home, make sure that you give Glenmo Dan on Instagram a follow, and make sure that you check him out when he is on the road. If he stops in at Florida, I'm going to make sure I stop by and check him out and say hi and shake hands in real life.
Where are you based? I'm in Tampa on Friday.
I'm in Orlando.
Oh, damn it.
Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about it after.
Okay, right on. Perfect.
But perfect. Guys, make sure that you like, subscribe, share the show with your friends, give a 5-star review. If you have any ideas or concepts you'd like to make sure I put in my upcoming series for this summer, I should make a drink to that, let me know. I'm always looking for suggestions and for random bouts of inspiration. As always, drink responsibly, be good to each other, drive safe, don't do anything wild, and take care of yourselves. See you guys next week. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey guys, today's episode is brought to you by Burn, Termite, and Pest Control. I first met Joe Byrne on Full Frontal Nerdy Show and decided to give his company a try. They have been the best pest service I've ever had, from flexible scheduling, attention to detail, fair pricing, and everything you love about a small business. I highly recommend Joe Byrne and Burn, Termite, and Pest Control. It's a family-owned and operated business with over 30 years of experience in termite and pest. You can reach Burn, Termite, and Pest Control at 321-297-7985. Once again, 321-297-7985. And let them know Bourbon and Bullshit sent you. Thanks, guys. See you next time.